Leadership Boot Camp. This is a camp that the conductor is running in partnership with BioVentures and UAMS. It's a week-long residential camp where we teach college students how to start and fund their own health sciences venture. This is day 3 of a very, we also partner with Conway Regional. Sorry. This is a very long and grueling week for the students who get a kind of a crash course in entrepreneurship, and they spend the entire day tomorrow at Conway Regional actually doing customer discovery with real patients and physicians, etc. So I'm honored to have Matt Troop with us tonight. He's the president and CEO of Conway Regional Health System. I normally see him on the walking trail at 6:30 in the morning when I'm not wearing makeup. So I'm glad you're here tonight. And this is a casual Q&A fireside chat. It's going to last for about 40 minutes, and then I'm going to open it up to audience Q&A. So I encourage you to write down your questions and also share what you're hearing tonight on social media. So our hashtag is FullSteamAR. Matt will have a ton of great insight about life and the world. So please share that. And huge thank you to the conductor team. So everyone standing around here tonight who made this happen. Dylan, who is live streaming, I think, as I speak. Marco and Jeff and the whole team, thank you very, very much. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Matt, could you tell us just generally about yourself? Where did you grow up?
So I am originally from Dallas, Texas. Those of you that may be familiar with that area, kind of the northeast part of Dallas, an area called Lake Highlands. Grew up the youngest of 5 kids, and therefore I am the most favorite child in my family because of my age order. But no, grew up there, lived there through high school, and went to Texas A&M University. Crickets. Wow. Nobody. Usually, yeah, I get some heckle. Anyway, went to Texas A&M University, studied business there, and it was around the time, in the early 90s when healthcare was getting a lot of public discussion and public debate with Hillary Care and kind of the policy of healthcare, and I was really fascinated by that field. And from A&M went to Trinity University in San Antonio, where I got my master's of healthcare administration. So I met and married my wife at Texas A&M. We have 4 sons aged 12 to 22, one at Hendrix and one that's about to go to college, actually just small school outside of St. Louis. So I'm going to bust some tables after this because liberal arts educations are not cheap, as many of you know in the room. But in any event, that's basically about me.
So talk about your career trajectory from there. Mm-hmm. So you graduate. What did you want to do, and what did you do at that point?
In healthcare administration, you go through typically some combination. Most programs go through some combination of a didactic and then an experiential or internship, or what we call the administrative residency type program. So if any of you are familiar with how medical schools or how doctors become doctors, we try to map our program very similar to that, in the sense that you have a kind of intensive time frame when you're in the class and you're learning policy and you're learning finance, and then we get thrown to the wolves out in industry, and you basically get paid very little, next to nothing, and work like a dog for a year or more to convince them to hire you. So I was fortunate enough to be invited to do my residency at Presbyterian Hospital of Dallas, which was and still is an uber competitive market. I equate my time there in terms of like dog years. 1 year there is equivalent to like 7 somewhere else. Very competitive environment, fast-paced, just a ton to learn. And I was very fortunate to do a residency at a time when our organization was actually talking to Harris Methodist in Fort Worth about a potential merger, which eventually became Texas Health Resources. So I worked in an office, the same office, but for 3 different organizations, over a period of about 6 months. It was kind of interesting. But all for the same, obviously boss and same core group of hospitals. But in our residency, we spend time rounding and shadowing environmental services, food service. We shadow a nurse, and you're observing and you're taking a lot in terms of how healthcare really works. I fell in love with the hospital environment. I I love hospitals. If my family and I are traveling somewhere and we drive past a hospital, I always have to like slow down and look around and how many cars there are and ask questions. When I just had a friend of mine who had a pretty significant knee surgery recently, and I'm ashamed to say that before I asked him how he was doing, I had to know who did your surgery and where, because that's sort of my field. But I love hospitals. I love the dynamic nature of hospitals. How complex hospitals are, and intermix that with all the business, moral, ethical issues intermixed with policy and patient stories. It is just a really fascinating and wonderful environment to be in. So after my residency, knew I wanted to be in hospital operations, went to a small hospital in Greenville, Texas, just outside of Dallas, about an hour outside of Dallas. My first operations job, and anything that they threw at me, I just said, yes, may I have another? So, learned a lot there. I was a compliance officer for a period of time, which is kind of a unique role within hospitals. Learned a lot from that. I got recruited back to Dallas to go to work for Methodist Health System in Dallas, and then got recruited back to go back to Presbyterian. So if you're, bouncing, I've been in healthcare for about 22 years, and so went to Presbyterian Hospital of Winsboro was my first president CEO role, and then that hospital eventually became part of another health system. I decided I didn't want to be a part of that, and came to be a vice president at my prior hospital at Texas Health Dallas, Presbyterian Hospital of Dallas, and so was there about 6 years before I moved on to Tulsa, which was a horrible job experience. And then followed that up with another horrible job experience in Florida, and then now I'm in heaven. So this is awesome.
Okay, can I interject for a second?
Yes.
Okay. I have your CV in front
Yes.
of, by the way.
Very long.
Can we just dig into that a little
Yeah.
bit? Okay. And sorry, I didn't introduce. So you're in heaven now, which is fantastic.
Yep.
But we're glad that you're there. Can you talk a little bit about the? Okay, so you're 34 years old and you're in Winsboro.
Mm-hmm.
Can you take us back to that point and what was that part of your job,
So
life like?
Winsboro is 2 hours east of Dallas and about an hour north of Tyler. And if you're familiar with that part of the world at all, it in its own way, even though it's a rural hospital, is very competitive. There were 5 hospitals in about a 10-mile radius and a population of about 50,000 people. So 2 health systems in Tyler, East Texas Medical Center and Trinity Mother Francis, that just duked it out. I mean, 2 nonprofits that just beat each other up. And I could not, when I was at Texas Health, I kind of had this very elitist attitude that, well, if anybody wants to get good surgery or good care, they're going to go to Dallas, right? Of course. Well, I got out to Winsboro and found out that people just don't want to do that. They don't want to fight the traffic. They want health care that's local. They feel more comfortable going to Tyler. And so I could not fight that stream. And as I began to kind of assess partnerships and ways in which I could make my hospital viable, we developed a partnership with Trinity Mother Francis in Tyler that, culturally was very aligned, had a lot of similarities in terms of what they aspired to. Our missions and visions were very similar. So we ended up developing a partnership with Trinity Mother Francis, and they ended up taking our hospital on. And I made it clear I didn't move my family out to East Texas to become a part of that health system. Mm-hmm. And so, in talking with different leaders within Texas Health, had an opportunity to come up at Presbyterian Hospital of Dallas, which, if you look at organizationally, I was president of a hospital out in East Texas. It was a small hospital, about 50 beds. And then I went to be a vice president at another hospital, which, from a progression standpoint, didn't exactly fit, but from an experience perspective was very formative. I mean, I got to work on deals and improvement projects that I just wouldn't have gotten exposure to otherwise. And I think it really shaped me in terms of my learning and knowledge about my industry and things that I was very passionate about. So that's what led me back to Dallas. And I was in Dallas for a while and just kind of became somewhat stagnant from a career growth perspective, and got a call from a recruiter. Something I don't do very well is network. sometimes I'll think, gosh, I should call so-and-so, see how they're doing. And I don't ever do that. But anyway, I got a call randomly from a recruiter who just was very flattering and said, hey, why don't you come up to Tulsa? And it's a great, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it's a small for-profit, and it's going to be a great opportunity for you.
And how old were you at that time?
I was 41.
Was this in 2013?
Nope, 2011. Yeah, 2011. Okay. So
this is my scribbling when I was
talking
to you earlier, so I couldn't read my handwriting.
So it's 2011. I go up to Tulsa, and it's a horrible environment. For-profit healthcare can have a very negative stereotype. Not-for-profit healthcare can have a negative stereotype. But to bag on for-profit healthcare for a moment, they can be very bottom-line centric, very cash flow centric. They can be all about mission, vision, values, and culture, until which time, some investor group says, hey, we want to buy your health system, and/or, hey, your liquidity's down, 0.2%. And I can literally tell you, I went on a vacation in the middle of the summer of 2011, and, it was 12, and came back on Monday, and I had to lay 50 people off. I had to tell 50 people that they were no longer working for my organization by end of business that day. My colleagues were kind enough not to call me while I was on vacation. Gee, thanks. But trying to do that kind of stuff is fairly common in the for-profit environment. And oftentimes, I argue, penny wise, pound foolish, because you ruin so many relationships and you lose so much, organizational knowledge about how to do things, that eventually you become less efficient. The more you go through that process. And so we had a real disconnect, and eventually, and it's easier to have this conversation when I'm on this side of my career path, they eliminated my position. I was there as a chief operating officer of that hospital, and they, in a cost-saving, restructuring, eliminated my position. So 4 children, a wife, new house, beautiful house, and I'm jobless.
So what did you do?
What I did?
What did you do that?
I raged. What
was the first thing you did at that point?
It's a funny story. As a person of faith, I tend to look at the world from a Christian worldview. I tend to see acts and events as part of a larger narrative and not just purely random. My daily routine is I get up in the morning and I read. And then I go for a run. And I'm up one morning reading. This is on December 5th of 2012, I think it was. 12, sure, 2012. December 5th is my mom's birthday, so that's why that date really sticks out to me. But anyway, I'd gotten an email from my former boss at Presby Dallas, and he said, hey, I doubt you're looking, but I just got this email from a recruiter. And I thought of you. It sounded like you might be a good fit for you, and I emailed him back, deleted the email, and said, hey, thanks for sending it to me. And by 5 o'clock that afternoon, I was like, where is that damn email? What? Pulling it out. And that's actually where I ended up, was in Melbourne. It was basically 2 months, and I was moving my family back or out to Florida, to Melbourne, Florida, which, if any of you know where that is, it's just south of Cape Canaveral. Beautiful area. Loved the area. It was fantastic. We had manatees and dolphins swimming around in our backyard. It was really beautiful. But again, the job was just not a good fit.
Can you dig into that a little bit? Why? So what was that experience like for you?
So I think emotionally, if you think about, kind of reflecting back on this, when I was at Presby Dallas, I was somewhat of a golden child. I don't mean to say that in a very braggadocious way at all, but I had a lot of success. I knew a lot of people. It's where I'd done my administrative residency. I had a lot of great connections, and I was in a very difficult environment and having success. So when I contemplated Tulsa, and again, this is something in hindsight you can see, but in the time you don't. I thought, I can be successful there. I can be successful anywhere. There's no reason I can't be successful. And I think in leadership, you eventually get to a point where your technical competence matters less and less. It's really more about fit, style? Do you share the same values? And ultimately, do they have just as much of a desire to see you successful as you do? And that was a disconnect in Tulsa. When I get this sudden interest to go to Florida in Paradise, I thought, well, this is good. This is a good rebound. And I quickly assessed that the structure and the way in which that job was structured and the expectations and some of the relationships that I didn't know about before getting there, that were there, it was quickly apparent that this wasn't going to work, at least in terms of how I did my job and my values and how I approached my work. So, that did not work out or come to a good end either. So, I was there about a year, and then I was in search again, and that was a very, very difficult. I don't know. I'm speaking to a group of men and women who, especially if you're entrepreneurs or you aspire to own your own business, you're gonna fail. I mean, you're gonna fail big. Come talk to me. I got lots of experience at it. I can tell you all about it. And it was a period of time in my life where I was very, very angry. Probably not a whole lot of joy to be around. And I got through about a good 8 months, and I went on job interviews all over the country, thought about moving to places that I never thought I'd ever move to. I had 2 job interviews out in Fresno, California. Anybody been to Fresno? All right, somebody may be watching Fresno, I don't know. But it's like I would talk to people from California who weren't from Fresno, and they would always get this look, Fresno? Anyway, but I kept, things just weren't working out. And I had a conversation with a mentor of mine who said, you need to find out how God can tell a great story from your experience. How can you learn from your experience, your prior to jobs, and how can God use you, use that story to tell a great story? And it totally changed my worldview and perspective on those 2 failures and how I could reapproach and re-engage my search. And it was literally like a switch just went on, and doors started opening up, and I had the opportunity actually at the time to go to a health system in Texas that looked pretty promising, or to come to Little Rock, Arkansas. There's a funny story there. I interviewed technically for the Hot Springs hospital president position with CHI St. Vincent. I think there were 4 of us that interviewed, and they ended up hiring 3 of us. So they created a position for me, and Conway ended up working out about 6 months later. Ended up finding about this opportunity and job. So, yeah.
Just a couple of questions about that kind of last part of the journey. So, and I shared this with you, but we have that in common, where a really hard kind of season of life.
Yeah. And
it's hard to know what to do when you're in that kind of season, because like you said, you're probably not the best person to be around, and you're dealing with so much stuff in your head. So I was just reading a stat the other day, 85% of people either hate or feel disconnected from their jobs right now. And I think a lot of those people turn to entrepreneurship, honestly, because they have this moment where they're like, oh, well, I can just create my own destiny. Why don't I just do that? But what advice do you have for people in that situation?
I think for me, it made me really realize and appreciate just how much I miss the healthcare world. Healthcare in particular, and I'm sure for many of you, your job can sometimes be a real drain, but when you're disconnected from it, you realize, is this a passion that I really want to pursue? So first of all, and what I did was I spent a lot of time just in reflection. I actually, it's kind of a funny story, but there's a career counselor that we use for our kids, our boys, when they get to be about 17, 18 years old and start contemplating where they want to go to school and potential career choices. We have this, career counselor that we hook up with, and she does all these batteries of tests and asks them a bunch of questions. And I thought her name is Jenny Larson. I'm going to call Jenny. It's good enough for a 16-year-old. By golly, it's good for me. Maybe I'm in the wrong field. And I began to go through that process with her. And she's got a really cool tool where she, gives a list of professions and people who fit your profile, for likes, dislikes, and leadership styles, and people that are happy in their career fields and what you match up with. and I hated every one of them. I mean, it was just like, according to her, I wasn't supposed to be a hospital administrator. She was wrong, but anyway. But I went through that process. I think being prayerful about, what's the story? What's the narrative? How can I use this experience for good? How can I use this failure for good? And I think I would argue that that's not, exclusive to being a Christian. I think any of you, if you go through a difficult season, a difficult time, in general, you have two choices you can make. You can be a victim. You can say, man, I was really wronged, and I went through that phase. I was really wrong. These people are evil. They really, they weren't honest with me, and I came up with every narrative in the world to dislike them. Or I can decide to be a hero. I can decide that opposite, not necessarily hero in a literal sense, but the opposite of a villain or somebody who's victimized. How can I turn that into something good? And I could tell you that my role in Conway is very different. I don't think we would have the success. I don't think we would have the culture if I didn't go through those difficult seasons. And so, there's a great quote, and I don't know who said it, but life is best lived forward, but understood backwards. A lot of times when you're going through those difficult times, you don't know. You may not have an answer for why you're going through that difficult change. But I can assure you, the healthiest perspective is to look back and say, okay, what was that shaping me to do? How can I use that to learn? How can I use that to better people around me? How can I use that to leverage my next opportunity or my next position? Because it's just completely unproductive to be a victim. And I had a lot of good reasons to be a victim. I mean, we can do a whole other deal on that alone, but that's not productive.
That was like literally a question on my sheet, which was, I think when your back's up against the wall, you basically have two options. One is to just quit, and one is to fight. I think that you do your best fighting sometimes when your back's up against a wall. And I was going to ask you do you think you'd be here today if you hadn't had those kind of hard seasons of life?
Yeah, I don't think I would have. I don't think I would have, and I don't think I'd approach my job the same way. I see we do a lot of hard work at Conway Regional, right, team? Yeah. There's, never a dull moment. And I don't think I would have the passion or the energy to pour myself into it if I didn't, I think that season of transition really taught me. So, I think it definitely shaped. I don't think I would have considered this kind of opportunity, had it not been for those life, circumstances and position.
So talk about coming to Conway. So this is now a new kind of landscape for you. What was that whole process like?
It's very funny. I've told this story several times, but as part of the St. Vincent executive team, we would have these weekly meetings, and my boss, a guy by the name of Chad Aduttle, who's the market president for St. Vincent, would give us updates on discussions he was having with Conway Regional about a potential management type arrangement. And the environment was this. There's about 40 physicians that are actively engaged with Baptist. Haven't built their hospital yet, but they're picking out floor plans and color schemes. I mean, they're really into this. They're going to leave. The staff's all freaked out. The board doesn't know what to do. And we're going to go in management. And I'm thinking in my head, I am so glad I'm not in Conway, Arkansas right now. That sounds absolutely miserable, and hopeless. And so sure enough, he, pulls me into his office one day and says, hey, this looks like this management agreement's going to work out. I want to take you up and introduce you to the board and you can meet them. And I'm like, oh, okay. How do I feel about that? But, I did. And what was really interesting, we did our own analysis at St. Vincent. In talking to some of the team at Conway Regional, our numbers kind of matched up. And it's hard to explain without getting into minutia that may lose half the audience, but we had very, very good reason to believe we were going to lose between $30 and $40 million as a result of another hospital coming to Conway. And it's just data. Healthcare in some respects can generate its own demand, but there's only so many babies born in Faulkner County, right? I've said this before publicly. hopefully you guys get the joke, but unless you believe that all hospital TV dramas are real, hospitals don't produce babies. There's not that much hanky-panky going on. There's not many, more hospitals don't mean more babies. So there's kind of a fixed demand, if you will, in the market. And so there was one school of thought that said, you need to be focused on cost cutting because, you're in the healthcare world, your physician in many respects is just as much your customer as the patient that's in a bed. And oftentimes that patient's only there because their physician told them to be there. And there's a trust and a relationship there that as a hospital we desperately need in order to live. And so that was a very, very real, viable threat. And at a revenue stream of about 140 million at the time, high 130s, to lose 40 million, to have $40 million ripped out, you can't shrink and make that work. Mm-hmm. You can't cut down overtime to 2% and get there. That just doesn't happen. And so you talk about having your back up against the wall, and I think it is interesting to I hadn't reflected on this before until you brought up that analogy, that metaphor. But when I came into the role, there's my boss saying, you got to cut expenses, you got to really think about how you can right-size that hospital and the chassis of that enterprise. Or you could say, no, we're going to fight. We got a story to tell. We are going to, on principle and on our values, step back and punch them in the mouth. And I don't mean that really negative toward Baptist. Baptist is a great organization, but there was a principle that was there that we wanted to make. And we began to rally around that cause, that sense of survival, that sense of we are not going to shrink to greatness. We're going to advance to provide a level of care and quality and service that is worthy of our calling, and not just sit back and be apathetic and quiet. We're going to lean into it, and I think that is very much born of my experience, of going through environments where I wasn't as successful as I wanted to be, being really disappointed, and now having the opportunity. I feel like in so many respects those experiences are bundled up over in the highway off of I-40. Y'all may know what I'm talking about. But it's like it's our opportunity, my opportunity to tell a different story.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I definitely saw a trend when I was looking over your life trajectory that you're a fighter.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a really hard position that you're in when you're taking over leadership at Conway Regional, because not only do you have the situation that you just laid out, but also brand new team, a team kind of trying to adopt a new leader. Talk about that entire time of your life and how did you navigate those waters?
It was very, very chaotic. Where they all go? There's Richard. Yeah, Richard was a part of it. Yeah, so really, it sounds cliche and trite to say, but my first objective was to get to know people. Really get to know them, and so we've affectionately renamed it Crytopia, CRY-topia. We spent a weekend at Red Apple, and we basically sat in a circle and we all cried. We all told our story and our upbringing, and we shared personal things about ourselves and people that had been with the organization for 20 years shared stuff that other people around the room didn't know. And it was kind of a real cool team building, unifying event. I very quickly began to really communicate and over-communicate. In the midst of change, people will make up some really interesting, creative, psychotic stuff in the absence of communication, right? And we've all been there, but that girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse that doesn't return your call or doesn't return your text, and it's whatever time, we make up some really crazy stuff, and it's really interesting what the brain can do. And this is when I came into Conway, a little bit of backdrop of the story. So there was a period of time actually when St. Vincent and the physicians here were talking about a partnership, and St. Vincent was going to be the competitor to Conway Regional. St. Vincent ended up backing out of that deal at the last minute. So I had doctors that didn't like me because I was from St. Vincent. I had staff that were scared to death because they thought we were going to centralize everything, and so there were going to be massive layoffs. There's certain things that St. Vincent does from an outsourcing perspective. They outsource food service, they outsource environmental services. They thought, well, he's certainly going to do that, And so there was a lot of fear, a lot of concern. And so I can't emphasize enough, a lot of our talks were around getting to know each other, building trust, being vulnerable, just like I've shared with you some of my career frustrations, so that they can see that they're dealing with a person and not somebody who's trying to, climb a career ladder. And being open to listen, that is so key. Even in physicians, I mean, keep in mind, these 30 physicians that were engaged with Baptist were largely proceduralists, and had resigned themselves that they were moving part of their practice, all or part of their practice, across town. And I was, very clear. It was very clear to me there were certain people to write off. That doctor is on the other team, and he's gone. And I'm proud to say some of those guys actually, they're still there, but they even work for us. I mean, they're a part of the Conway Regional team. They're an integrated physician. We employ their practice. So, those things, those kind of soft skills can actually work. We started doing employee town halls every quarter, and they're mandatory, which blows people away that I talked to. Tried to do that in Tulsa, that didn't work, so they got rid of me. I tried to do that in Florida, it didn't work there, and they got rid of me. But in all seriousness, in any environment, you're going to have 10% of the population that just they're not happy. They're not happy. They don't like you. They don't like their kids. They don't like their dog. There is nothing you can do to make them happy. On the opposite end, you've got some other 10, 15, 20% that Richard and I could walk in tomorrow and say, we're going to cut your salary 10%. Sorry, hard times, and they'd show up 15 minutes early to work tomorrow. They're just loyal. But you've got that 60, 70% of people that are just right there in the middle, and they don't really know. They work as a means to an end, and they don't really see the connection between their work, their values, what their interests are. They don't really know a whole lot about the organization. They have certain things they may want to complain about, but that tends to be very episodic. And so we created a venue where, once a quarter, you've got to spend 30 to 45 minutes sitting in front of me, and I'm going to talk to you about all the reasons that you need to be excited about what's going on here, and really engage them in our organization and in our story. And it has dramatically improved our engagement scores. People feel like we've got a great, successful story to tell. And that begins to have a very positive flywheel effect. And it's interesting, as Richard and I have talked to many of the staff, they'll say, well, you think we could scale back the town halls, maybe they're a little much. And we've said, no, we're going to keep doing them. And you would think something mandatory like that would have a very negative connotation. But it doesn't, because I think ultimately they walk out of there feeling very prideful. They feel like, hey, our organization's doing stuff. They have a venue in which they can talk to me, and ask questions. My favorite story, and one of my favorite stories, was I was talking and we had Q&A, and one of the staff said, she was telling me, I really appreciate you, and you're just so accessible. And that other guy that was here before you, I never saw him. And I know that that's complete BS. I mean, the guy was there 17 years. I know he did rounds. But because I was capturing 30 minutes of her time every 3 months, I was able to appear very real, very approachable. She understood me without, spending a year, I think, at that time. So you got to be very intentional and purposeful about communication.
So a follow-up to that, you've been identified in multiple articles online as a servant leader. Can you speak to that? What does that mean, and why is that important to you?
So I believe that, and it was drilled into my head as an early leader, that leadership is a privilege. And by a privilege, I mean that, the line forms to the left of people who would love to be in my role. It is a privilege to be in that role. And in reality, what I do is sit in my office. I go to a lot of meetings. I make decisions. I try to explain to my kids what I do for a living every day. they never have really understood it. They swear I'm a doctor, and I'm like, I'm not a doctor. And one day, at my hospital in Dallas, I was shadowing this orthopedic surgeon. This surgeon just hated our guts, hated administration's guts. So I was like, I'm just going to follow this guy around like a dog and learn what he does, and eventually ended up developing a really good relationship with him. But I go home to my kids and I tell them that what I did that day. I got to watch several hip surgeries and knee replacement surgeries, and it was the coolest thing ever. And one of my sons goes, "Oh, so you watch other people work for a living? That's what you do? You watch." And in many respects, that's true. I don't lay hands on people, but I get to help support the work they do. I get to be a part of their story. I get to help enable them, and that is all about servanthood. It's not about me. It can't be about you as a leader. The minute it becomes about you as a leader, your focus varies, and that's a very dangerous ground in healthcare in particular. You can really get yourself in trouble, emotionally, spiritually, morally, ethically. My desire to be a servant comes from obviously my Christian faith, my Christian worldview, and Scripture is pretty clear on that about serving others. That is your role, is to serve others. And I've always tried to be very intentional about that. It's easy, especially when things are going well as a leader, to get an inflated ego, to start to think that you deserve the parking spot closest to the hospital, and you deserve the perks and the benefits that come with leadership, and drilling it into my head every day that I'm here to serve others. How can I serve others? How can I, either if it's writing a thank you note to somebody or taking time to go visit a patient, it helps to keep things real, and I think that enables me to be more effective ultimately.
Fantastic. I have one more question before I open it up. Talk about innovation and why that's important to you. And the conductor partnered with Conway Regional to do an innovation lab with your leadership there. Can you just talk about innovation in general? Why does it matter?
Yeah. So, in healthcare, it is really easy to get down. We have a healthcare system and enterprise nationally that continues to increase costs and burden more and more of the total economy, and not a whole lot of solutions to drive down the cost of care, nationally. I'm firmly convinced that we've got to rethink, get out of our box, think about how we can do things differently to reduce the cost of care, but more importantly, to improve health, and somehow impact those social determinants of care that ultimately drive up costs. And the only way you can do that is through some sort of very purposeful and intentional, innovative approach. And so we're privileged to have Jeff Standridge on our board, and he and I have had several visits about how do we incorporate that culture of innovation. In healthcare, if you look at the kind of people that typically go into healthcare, if you're a lab tech or you're in radiology, you tend to be very rules-based. You tend to, this is how I was taught to do things. This is what our protocol says. It's a very if-then kind of environment. And it doesn't breed the kind of people who really think differently or think out of the box. And so I wanted to try to create a different perspective. So we actually brought Jeff in, spent a day with our leadership team, of about our 90 top leaders. And we mixed them up into groups. They were on the fly, had to come up with identify a problem, and pitch their problem and solution. Our executive leadership team selected 2 teams. And the way this worked out, I guess we went through this process about this time of year, last year, and then selected 3 teams to come to our board retreat. We don't retreat at Conway Regional, we advance. So it's our board advance, and present their innovation idea to our board. And then our board, voted and selected one of those teams. And it was Grace was part of that process. It was a fantastic learning experience, and it stressed the heck out of them to come and present to the board. Jeff was very gracious with his time to meet, with the teams and kind of help guide and direct them and what they were doing. We really tried to elevate and make them feel special. They got to stay at the board. We had dinner with them. They got cash money, the winning team. They all got cash money, but the winning team got more cash money. And, we've made a commitment to try to develop that idea, that concept that they pitched. And it had a great benefit of really helping to teach people, how do I do this? How do I think about my work differently? Because, I'm a generalist by nature and particularly in healthcare. If I'm telling someone how to do their job, we're in a lot of trouble. We need people who can think and think creatively and think adaptively in healthcare, and this was a new skill for them. So it helped them a lot to develop. And then just the exercise of making a presentation and making a pitch was a wonderful learning opportunity for that team, and something I know we all benefited from as well.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to open it for audience Q&A.
Hey, Matthew Pearson. Great talk. You talked a little bit about how growth happens when things happen to us. So loss of a job, or just generally reshaping the duties in the current role. And you talked a little bit about innovation, how you're shaping the organization, the culture of the organization. How do you proactively grow? So what do you specifically do to say, okay, I'm too comfortable in this area of my life? What do you do?
That's a great question. I constantly, and I think we should have Richard up here, Grace, comment on this. But I constantly try to seek feedback, and I by nature am a collaborator. I like to ask questions, and I will try to preface, a lot of my one-on-one meetings with, don't draw a conclusion about my line of questions about whether or not I think your idea stinks or it's really good. I'm seeking to understand, because I think at heart, I want to learn and to grow. So I think, in terms of finding areas that I can improve, I want to seek feedback. Every time I do an employee evaluation, every time we do goal reviews, which is part of our social operating mechanism at Conway Regional, we meet with directors once a quarter and go over their goals. They all have goals, they all have metrics. We keep track of their action plans and things that they're doing. And the last question we always ask is, what can we do? How can we serve you? What can we do for you? And, it really throws people off, but that's a great feedback loop for me. I develop other feedback loops. We do a lot of surveys at Conway Regional to really give ourselves feedback on how administration is perceived. We've got multiple tools. I can go into those if you'd like, but we have multiple tools to give us feedback. There, we spend a full day as a leadership team, our executive leadership team, off-site about once every 2 months, and we have very open and candid conversation. How are we doing? Where are areas that we need to improve? Things that that we need to pay more attention to. On a personal level, you mentioned the trail. Kim and I have very similar times. It seems like we ran into each other.
Well, I have some color commentary to this.
Yeah, well, you're not going to beat me anymore. That's all I'm going to say. So
my goal in our last 10K was to beat him, and I did.
But I run. I don't run for speed. I don't run because I'm trying to break world records. But I find that running is very meditative for me. It's time in my own head. And I can get really lost there, and that is a great reflective time for me to think about my day, think about things that I'm doing and have going on as a way of growth. I read a lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I minimize nonsense in my life. I don't, we don't spend much time in my house other than sports, really watching much TV. Well, that sounds probably really boring to many of you, but I try to spend a lot of time in that space about, how can I grow? How can I develop? What are things that I need to be doing? Seeking feedback from people, trying to encourage them to be honest with me as well.
Awesome.
You said you read a lot and you listen to a lot of podcasts. What books you listen to? Who do you like as leaders?
Oh gosh, there's, if you're looking for a great 20, 30-minute podcast on leadership, Craig Rochelle is great. He happens to be a pastor at, I think, the country's largest church, but he he doesn't even talk about his faith. I mean, he's all about leadership. Very succinct, very organized. He's great. I've encouraged that podcast a lot. Other leadership podcasts, I listen to a lot of like faith-based type stuff. So there's a guy named Albert Mohler, who's president of the Southern Baptist Seminary. I listen to him a lot. I do listen to some things just purely entertainment. There's a great podcast called Dr. Death. Have y'all ever listened to that one? Fascinating podcast. Serial. Have y'all ever heard
Yes,
Serial?
of course.
Oh my gosh. That was, I live in Little Rock, and while that was going on, I'd drive 35 minutes home and then sit in my car for another 15 minutes to finish up Serial. That's a very good one. Other ones that come up. There's I'm fascinated by theology and leadership as well. So just any Christian podcast. There's a great one called The Bible Project I listen to pretty regularly. So
What about books?
Books, I tend to. I love the kind of the neuroscience leadership sort of realm. So Your Brain at Work is a good one. There's a couple of others now that you've asked me. They're going to escape me. But there's a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow. There's books like that really kind of get into the psychology switch is another good one. 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. There's another good one called, it's kind of a parable similar to leadership, but it's about kind of out-of-the-box thinking and what happens when you kind of approach problems inside the box versus outside the box. I'm trying to picture my bookshelf in my office. A great book, very funny, by Scott Adams, the Dilbert, author of Dilbert. He wrote a book called Win Bigly, and it's all about Trump's campaign. And I don't want to get political on anybody here, but you could say a lot of things about Trump, good and bad, I'm sure, but he is a master communicator, in terms of pushing the message, controlling the agenda, and how he does that. And it is a fascinating read just on communication. I would highly recommend that one.
Interesting.
Not that I apply any of those tricks of the trade at Conway Regional.
Yeah.
Do you know how much of the success of Conway Regional can contribute to the culture that you help to create?
And can you also talk about the numbers of success that you've had, some of the metrics?
Yeah, so when I got to Conway Regional, I really wanted people to be engaged, be excited about what they do, find passion and purpose in their work. It's really easy in healthcare in particular to get stuck on this narrative of woe is me, reimbursements are going down, payments are going down, patients are getting sicker, there's all this regulation, doctors don't like me, all this stuff. And we wanted to really change the narrative to tell a story about success. And so every time we get a chance to, we're a modern healthcare best place to work, which is a national recognition, we celebrate the heck out of that. When we got recognized by a group called Care Checks for quality, we celebrate the heck out of that. If you were to drive on our campus, you'll see multiple references to those awards and those recognitions to continually remind people about, you're working for a winner. You're working for an organization that isn't going to stand stagnant. And I have told the story many times in our town halls about the philosophy and reason why we're going to lean in and we're going to take risks and we're going to do things we've not done before. Not because it's all about competition, because that's really not it. We're not trying to get a metric. We're trying to tell a great story for a great community that we all love. It is interesting to go around any orientation and ask people, how many of you have had a family friend or loved one as a patient at Conway Regional? 90% of the room raises their hand. So to them, finding what sort of viscerally they connect with at Conway Regional, we're right across the street from UCA. So we have a tuition reimbursement program that we doubled literally doubled in 1 year. And even though not everybody has access to that benefit, it tells a story. We care about you. We want you to be successful. We want you to grow. So, we developed, one of the first things I did, I got there in September, in October, I created kind of a kitchen cabinet with physicians, if you will. And so every month, I found formal and informal physician leaders that were very influential. We began having dinner with them once a month and just very open-ended discussions about the future and what we were facing, and trying to identify what that future vision could look like, where physicians are a partner to us. And they began to feel empowered, like, hey, this is my hospital, this is our story. And when Baptist did open up, which drew off about 25% of our ER volume. The ER is our front door. 60 plus, almost 70% of our patients, inpatient admissions, originate in the ER, so that hurt. But I'm proud to say if we stay on current course, we will be at or slightly above our admission volume from 2016 when Baptist opened. We have done that through adding new physicians, so specialties that have never been in this community before: neurosurgery, spine, vascular surgery, infectious disease. It's interesting. I can remember a conversation around an initiative where we were going to bet the farm, basically, our whole bottom line on our physician partnership and our physician structure. And that was a scary moment, but it ended up, obviously paying off. Our physician engagement, last 3-year average, 92nd percentile, which in this day and age in healthcare is really impressive. Our employee engagement's at the 80th percentile. Numerous things with quality that I can go on and on about, but you've got to remind people and tell people, here's why you should be really proud of your organization, and here's what we're doing and why we're doing it, to engage that middle 70-80%. And once that flywheel starts to go, it's easier to recruit a physician when I can go to them and show them a lot of happy physicians who say, yeah, administration here really listens. This is a great place to practice. It makes it a lot easier to add and grow. We've added we were at 18 employed providers in 2015. We will probably eclipse 60 by the end of this year. Added clinics in Russellville, Pottsville, added providers, all over the place. So it's been a good story to tell, rather than thinking, oh gosh, I got to constrain because I got this new competitor. We're going to lean in.
Each are 2 last questions.
I wanted to ask, who do you attribute to being your most influential mentor, and what did you learn?
So I'm a real observer, student of leaders, and so it's hard for me to point to just one. There's a guy named Britt Barrett who was very influential to me. Just had a very intentional communication style and leadership style. Our town halls are a real, I ripped that completely off from him. Other leaders that I grew up with that I said, wow, there's 2 or 3 things about that guy I really like. I'm going to emulate that, but I'm going to forget those other 12 things. And I'll tell you, I learned almost more from those kinds of individuals. Early in my career, there's a guy named Mark Merrill, probably the smartest hospital administrator I've ever known. He had an intensity about him and a focus that I emulate. We wear ties at Conway Regional, primarily because of Mark Merrill. Mark, I remember I kind of decided I would adopt a casual Friday look. And he said, I never really understood why patients, guests, visitors, doctors, Monday through Thursday get the professional looking you, but on Friday they get the casual looking you. And I didn't really have a good answer for that. So, I try to pick and choose, and not just, leaders within my own field, but other fields as well. But Britt Barrett, the direct answer to your question, is probably one of my more influential ones.
Yeah, last question.
What are some major healthcare trends that you all are looking at right now? Whether it's using machine learning or integrating it into robotics? Where do some things go?
It's a good question. I think a big area of focus and contemplation for us is just population health management. How do we improve health? How do we create some stickiness with our physicians and our clinics so that we're managing chronic illnesses better? We're keeping people connected to our health system. There is a lot of talk in the industry about AI and different things within the physician practice management. Part of the challenge in healthcare and what makes us sometimes so resistant to change is that financing lags way behind practice. So AI is great, and it's great to think that by keeping people healthy and out of the physician's office, we're going to make a lot of money. But the system it's set up that way, and so part of some of those challenges are kind of slower in healthcare to adopt. But that's a whole other discussion about social determinants of care. But what drives up cost of care in this country are social determinants. It's your zip code. It's things that, frankly, it's your housing. It's your food quality. Those types of things drive up the cost of care. It's a fascinating study. One of the books I read called The American Healthcare Paradox that looks at the amount of money we spend in healthcare, which is really, really high. Relative to other Western nations, we're 2-3 times the rest of the world. But on social programs, making sure people get the right food, they get a good education, we lag behind, relatively speaking. When you add those two together, we're about average, with France, which is like crazy. They're socialist, right? I'm kidding. But when you add those two together, part of the reason they spend less on healthcare is because they spend more in these other areas. And so a large part of what I think about and contemplate with our team is how do we address those social determinants in a way that has economic value, furthers our mission of improving health, and builds some brand identity and brand equity with a population that's the right thing to do, but then also is sustainable financially. So.
Awesome. And what is one piece of business advice you would leave us with?
Oh gosh. Life's too short not to be passionate. Be passionate. Be fired up. I hate apathy. Enjoy what you do. Find the story that is within your career, within your professional life, and go tell it. Because you can. There's a great quote by a guy named Timothy Keller. That's another great book, Any Good Endeavor, where he talks about, everyone has heard the cliche, I wish I'd spent more time in the office. Or everyone gets to the end of their life and says, yeah, I wish I had not spent more time in the office. But then he goes on to say, but what if, more time in the office meant spreading more love, helping people, doing more good in the world? Would you look at that statement a little differently? And when you look and you reflect on your career, can you answer yes to that question? That my work help people be more successful, help improve the quality of life, help people enjoy what they do. I think one of the funnest things I get to do every day is help people find purpose in their work. I know one of the questions we had talked about before was work-life balance. Mm-hmm. I'm a poor example. I don't think you can achieve work-life balance. What I do think is that you go through seasons of life where there are times in which there's times for more work-life balance than others, and what you can do, though, what you can do for your teams, and what I try to do for my team, is to help people find purpose and happiness and joy in their work, and then suddenly work-life balance becomes more real, it becomes more tangible. I feel more fulfilled. I'm a better husband, father, when I can find purpose and meaning in my work. So I guess that would probably be the one. I gave you more than one, but I don't know how many I gave you. But that's I guess what I would say.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for being here tonight, literally opening your doors tomorrow for these boot campers to learn everything that you just talked about and hands-on innovation and practice. And apologies in advance for ruining all your racing pictures, because I know in all the professional pictures I get from my races, you look great in the background.
Oh no!
In the background, and I like I'm struggling. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.